Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is a video that I've been looking forward to, well, I don't know, I haven't, well, maybe not looking forward to, but looking forward to getting started on, and that's something that I'm really, I guess passionate about when it comes to the creation of some of my different scenes and the objects, more so the objects within the scene, and that is volumes and defining volume within a given space. Okay, so when we're doing rubber stamping, we're doing two-dimensional types of imagery, right? But my whole thing about that is when I'm trying to create kind of space within a given scene, I want, backgrounds to look like they're far off in the distance, foregrounds to look like they're very near, but within each one of these objects or images, okay, I like to create space within those objects. So I like taking a two-dimensional surface and making it seem more three-dimensional, okay? And that's what this video is about. It's about kind of enhancing what already exists in the image, okay, and just making it a little bit more dimensional, okay? You can see these tones that I've applied here. This is the same image right there. I mean, it's very apparent, but there's just a little bit more depth within these forms like that. Let's see, I don't have a before and after. I toned all my lakeside coves right here, but you can see the forms in here have been defined a little bit more. This is just using some gray and black ink applied with a stylus tool, okay? But on this one right here, I've just taken these same rocks and I've just used some very light shades of some alcohol pens, inks, to define the forms on there a little bit more. You can get into some different hue and really some specific areas when you're using pens. Now, I don't finish any of these scenes off in here because that's not what this video is about, but just kind of creating space within your given objects, okay? And it's not really so much I might say defining, kind of volumes within a given scene, but they're really already defined within the images themselves. You just have to go in and reiterate that same idea of variation within a given object, okay, with some additional tones. So in other words, the objects themselves have variation in terms of tone, stippling, but what you want to do is you just want to go in and add some additional tones, but you want to retain the lightness of them, okay? So you get some nice variation within those objects, and they, in turn, will look a little more dimensional or three-dimensional by how you address your coloring and by what you retain in terms of the lightness of the impressions, okay? So anyways, here it is done on a cabin right here. We have a kind of a lighter area on one plane, a medium tone area on another plane, and on this plane right here. I'm talking about these sides, when I'm talking about different planes, just like an object like this. Here we have this white pad surface, but, this area over here could be in the darkness or something like that, and we have a little bit of a medium tone on that, even though this is white. Same thing with the blue right here. You can see these different planes right here, okay? This one right here is in the shadow, so this area here is a little bit darker blue. This one's a lighter blue, and this one's an even darker blue, and it's all the same blue, right? But we're just playing around with lighting on there, and it makes the image, or the object, I should say, a little bit more dimensional in terms of the values that you've applied to it. Okay, so anyways, I hope this video comes in handy. It's mostly for kind of people new to scenic stamping, and they want to kind of start to get into lighting. This really isn't so much about lighting, but lighting does come into play because, areas that you leave lighter just seem like the light is hitting it from, a certain direction, okay? But it's really talking about more in terms of volumes, okay? So the darker the area, you know, like my fist right here, that means it's not being exposed so much to, you know, certain lighting that's within the scene, okay? Areas that stick up are a little bit lighter, and this is the same thing that it's kind of happening when you address your different objects with this type of approach. Okay, so I hope it comes in handy. If you have any questions, just leave me a note in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Okay, let's get into some form and volumes here. This is a video that I've wanted to get around to for a while, but just haven't yet, but I thought today would be a good time to do it. Alright, now when we're looking at most of the Stampscape stamps are tonal, okay, so you can see a lot of different little, what we call stippling when it comes to line art, black and white illustration. There aren't really gray scale types of tones used, but there's just dots configured in various densities within a given space to define form and to say that certain areas are shaded a little bit more and certain areas a little bit more illuminated when it comes to the representation of a three-dimensional form on a two-dimensional surface. So we're looking up here at some different mountains, and certain areas are lighter and certain areas are darker, and that gives it a little bit more of a kind of a three-dimensional appearance. Okay, and that's one of the things that I think can really give scenes a lot more depth when we approach the, you know, kind of a stamped out composition and how we choose to finish off the various elements within that scene. Okay, that being said, what I mean by that is that when we look at a two-dimensional surface, okay, we're looking at this just flat piece of paper, okay, there aren't really any defining shadows on it, okay? So that being said, if I choose to color a certain object just one value, okay, it tends to flatten that object out somewhat because there's no change in lights and darks within that given space. So if we take a piece of paper like this and make it, you know, from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, suddenly we have a big change here, right? We have highlights, medium tones in here, darker, darker tones. So there's variation within, you know, a given three-dimensional surface. You know, anytime we, I don't know, bend or twist or whatever this. All right. Here's a three-dimensional object here. It has a similar value, right? But you can see this form right here, this round form, darks, highlights, mediums right here. You can look at the lid right here, how that looks a little bit different. If I turn it like this, then this area is a lot darker, and we get this, again, flat surface up here, but you can see the rounded shape right here has variation in it. And that's the type of thing that we can do in rubber stamping now, okay? Even in dark shades like this, when exposed to light, you know, this is a relatively dark piece of paper, right? So even if you have, if you're representing a piece of, I don't know, a dark piece of wood or something like that. Now this one happens to be iridescent too, but anytime you take something dark and you turn it, and if it's exposed to light, I mean, it depends on how reflected the surface you're representing is, but you get these variations within the form, right? So even if it's a really dark object, we don't have to think in terms of what we call local color, okay? Water is blue, a tree trunk is brown, whatever. There's forms and volumes within that. Let's look at another one right here. Here's a really dark brown. Again, it's the whatever, the indexing within Marvy, but here we go. It's a reflective one, of course, because this is plastic, but look at that. I mean, if I just turn this towards the light, it's really light. It's, I don't know, whatever, a 5% light or something like that, and we almost have black in here, right? So you get all kinds of different variation within a given object depending on the angle that it's exposed to the light and whatnot. All right, that being said, it doesn't have to be a complicated process as far as how we address the forms within our compositions after we stamp something out, okay? Now these are just some compositions that I did for some stamp sketches in one or two past videos, and I thought I would just address some of these as far as this concept of defining volume. Now this is really similar to a video that I did on shading, I think, or one or two videos, I don't remember. And it's a little bit different in terms of I'm not really going to spend too much time finishing off these scenes completely, but we'll take a look at these and really help to define some of the volumes on here, and I'll show you how to do it just in a really easy manner, okay? All right, now I don't have these stamps laying out right here, but you can just take a look at the forms within, say, this mountain right here, okay? You can see some areas where there's more tone than others, okay? Same thing down here in the meadow, there's usually some heavier dots at the base of some rocks, and we can see those rocks themselves, okay? Now, a lot of times when it comes to kind of the embellishment of tonal images, if someone's coming from a background in doing linear types of stamping, okay, let's say a rock looks like this, or a grouping of rocks are outlines, or something like that. A lot of times what we tend to do early on in certain types of stamping, okay, let's say there's a tree next to it too, and it's somewhere like this, okay, like that. We might take and there's nothing wrong with this either when it comes to linear types of stamping techniques. Okay, there might be something like this, and then we tend to color it in like so. Or if we're cutting it out of different types of paper. Now a lot of times what people will do is we'll add in maybe a little bit of embellishment, okay, where certain areas are a little bit darker than others, okay? And maybe on these rocks they're doing something like this, okay? Maybe on a tree trunk or something like that. They might add a little bit of, you know, some kind of dried brushing, tapping around it or something like that, where it becomes something more like this, you know, for a little bit of dimension. And this type of look does look good, okay? But we'll tell you how to take this type of foundation as far as coloring your images a little bit further, okay? To make things look even more dimensional and to give them volume, or representational volume within, again, a two-dimensional surface, okay? All right. That being said, let's take... Now this is all on glossy paper. You can use the same concepts for really any media and on any type of surface, okay? Alright, so let's just do this really fast. Alright, we have this mountain in the background, okay? And our grass in here. Let's just keep this really simple. I'm just going on with a London fog. It's a gray, which doesn't mean you can't do greens down in the grass, I don't know, whatever color mountains in the background that you want, different color rocks if you want to, okay? But just in general, what I'm doing is I'm starting off with a light tone, okay? I'll keep it nice and light so that when I apply this down, it's not really making too big of a commitment to any given value, okay? Value in terms of light and dark. But what I'll do is I'll just add some of this down. Now this London fog is a fairly light gray, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm just applying it to some of the areas of my imagery, okay? Now what I'm going to really do is apply a lot more of it, though, into those areas that I can see has more dots than others, okay? So it looks a little bit darker within the image itself, okay? Now, if there's a couple dots here or there, you don't have to say, oh wait, you know, I missed it over here. There's 2 dots, I have to put down a tone. It's nothing like that, okay? Or that particular, all right? So we can see some tone on the mountains, but see, in these areas that are a little bit lighter, I've just left it as is. I could put some tone on there if I want to, but I'll leave it just as is. I'll leave some of my lighter areas the lightest in terms of the absence of additional color. So just use your imagery as kind of, you know, taking your cues from the designs themselves. Okay. Now, as I go in here in color, there are certain rocks that are a little bit lighter than other areas, okay? So I'm just coming here into my meadow. Okay. And I'm creating a little bit of variation. This is kind of about shading too. Like I said, they're a little bit interchangeable in terms of you know, the concepts, okay, and shading. But sometimes, you know, in 3-dimensional forms, maybe that rock over there is in the shade, so I'm going to shade it all out, okay? I'll try to focus more on the volumes here, okay? And won't talk about so much about scene lighting, although, like I said, when you start toning in certain areas and leaving other areas as is, you are, in a sense, kind of creating a sense of lighting within a scene. Okay, so that is some gray left in here. So see, everything starts to look a little different because we have this oscillation of light and dark in here. We don't have a big change because that gray isn't quite so dark anyway, but that's a good way to start because you can get a feel for how something's going to look just in a very subtle way. And when you have this subtle kind of change that's happening at any given time, you have a lot more control over it than something really bold, okay? All right, I'm going with black now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into these areas that I applied the gray with, okay? And we can see quite a change happening because black, of course, is darker. Now, I'm not going with a super dark black. I'm just sponging this color in, so when you're using the sponge, you're just applying that much at any given time. Now, I press that down really hard, but what I'm really doing is I'm doing this type of thing right here, okay? So it's really just light shade in here, but see how that looks a little bit more dimensional just with a few swipes of a darker tone. Now, if this was something like a moonlit scene, or let's say it's a sunset scene. If it's a moonlit scene, I'm probably doing this with variations of blue. Okay, I would just be going with gray and black, although you can still put blue over the top of this. But if it's a sunset scene and you want kind of golden light, you know, reflecting off of the mountains, maybe I would be doing with this with browns and oranges or something like that, or reds. Okay. So that how it looks a little bit more dimensional, and there we have kind of a depth within that given space right there. And all I'm doing is I'm just kind of adding in some tone where tone already exists within those given objects, given designs. Say, same down here in these rocks down here. Let's make these rocks seem a little bit more dimensional, okay? So let's put a little bit of tone onto some of these rocks, but not over the top, you know, the whole thing, in other words, okay? These these rocks start standing out a little bit more. They look a little bit more round because it's like my hand or something like that. You know, there's some shade at the base of this. You know, this is a rounded form. So are these, okay? So if it was a rock like that, okay, basically all I'm doing is I'm just adding a little bit more tone to it, like this at the base of it, or halfway, okay? Let me see if I can do that on this little drawing here. It looks a little bit more dimensional, right? Because we have kind of lighter areas on the rock. I'll put a little bit of shade down at the base of it. So anyways, you see those rocks seem a little bit more dimensional. They seem more curved like that because they're top lit with shade on the bottom. That's all I'm doing here. Okay, add a little bit more to some areas of the mountain. Okay, even the meadow down here with some grass. The grass isn't quite as definitive. There's not like this big, huge, round clump, but there's areas that are lighter than others. And for something like this meadow, I usually kind of just define it myself. I just say, okay, this area is a little bit darker and this area is a little bit lighter, by just adding in some shade here and there, okay? See that right there? So that looks a little bit more dimensional, and we've addressed some lighting as well, okay? So these forms are we're just kind of reiterating what's in the forms themselves. Okay. Now here's a mountain in the background here, just using some color on it, and then this one was used in a masking video where I've put snow caps on the top of it. Alright, but you can see these forms down here in terms of lighting. Okay. Let's take a look at that right here. Okay, now like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time, you know, finishing any one of these scenes off, but let's take a look at these rocks down here. There are some lighter areas on the rocks, if you can see, and some darker areas. Typically the top sides of them are a little bit more illuminated. Here they are again here in this scene, okay? You can see the darker sides of it, but there's some variation right here. Now this one's supposed to be a moonlit scene, and this moon's kind of crying into the lake. But let's take this and let's see what we can do here. Alright, let me just go on just straight with this black right here, okay, and I'll show you just how fast, you know, this can be achieved. And again, this could be, you can be using any kind of color. Black shows up, you know, the fastest because it's the darkest color that we can be doing this with. You see this shadow down here is darker, so see that rock right here? How different it looks from this one. That's just with a little bit of gray scale tone added to it in the darker areas, okay? Here's this thing right here. This rock right here is in the foreground. You have this rock right behind it, right? Let's create a little bit of separation between the two. Let me see if I can do this just holding this. I'll create a little separation between all of these just by creating a little bit of shadow on these forms right here. See that? So see how much more rounded they look than these ones, okay? Let me just keep doing that, adding a little bit of tone on some of these as I go. We'll do a little comparison between some of these rocks and maybe the other side of the lake. Okay, See that right there? I think these forms look a little bit more dimensional than these ones. It doesn't mean you have to do that on every single rock, you know. You can unify certain things, like these rocks in the background. I'll just put a little bit of tone. Let's see. It's just a very narrow strip of them, so I'll try to not get it over all of them. Okay. Put a little shadow at the base of them, maybe. Okay, so you see these rocks back there look fairly dimensional. Okay, right over here. Let's take a look at this one right here. Okay, I'll try to keep this within the field of view for the camera here. Okay. See, to just put, you know, putting a little tone like that. If this was a colored pencil, you could be on matte paper, you can just be putting some tone using a given color. Use more than one color though. I mean, right here I'm just doing this kind of in a fast way, but whatever colors you're using, just use it accordingly. You know, use some lighter tones and work, you know, progressively a little bit darker, and put the darker tones at the base of them. But there's one tone right there. It's a few different values because I'm adding more black ink in some of the areas, which is making it a little bit darker, like at the base of the rock. But for the most part, that's really all there is to it right there. Here's this ledge right here. And see, when you define a certain form like that within a given space, I would recommend doing the same in more areas than one. Here it is right here, okay? But you can see there's a change in value here, right? This area of the ledge is a little bit lighter. This is 2 impressions, right? Is this 2 impressions? No, that's 1 impression of the ledge right here, but 2 different values used on here, okay? Just to create some variation. But let's do that thing where we're just kind of, let me move down here with the camera. Okay. So this little area up in here is darker, all right? And there's these little fissures, there's these cracks within the rock, okay? Let's just go in and add more tone to those areas, okay? Now I have this kind of on its edge like that. But like I said, this is a concept for any media on any type of surface, you know, if you want to kind of create a little bit more form, you know. And this is just one way to do it. I mean, you could color the whole thing in a certain color if you want to, okay? This is just if you want to add more volume, okay, and space into a given image. And I think it looks a little bit more rounded that way, okay? When it comes to line art, all right, that means just artwork that's just solely done in black, which black and white stippling is. There's only so much you can do, but that's a good thing because we can add in this additional tone into our objects using any given color. So if you want to make this, like I said, a sunset scene with these rocks ablaze and kind of golden hue, then you can do the shading in one of those colors, okay? Because your objects often reflect the color of lighting that's shining on it, right? Even water, okay? It looks maybe, who knows, it looks blue and on high noon, but come sunset time with all that golden light in the sky, the water usually reflects that type of color, so the water becomes that color, okay? So oftentimes your colors are within the shadows, okay? So see that right there? Here's the difference between these two right here, right? This does have form in it, okay, because I've drawn it into the design, but I think that right here just looks so much more I don't know, three-dimensional. a lot more volume in it, okay? Let's try to make this rock seem a little bit more rounded. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit more tone to it. Same thing like that. Okay, we can see that now. Look at these forms right here. Okay, we have it in the foreground, the background right here. Let's just address this mountain here. I won't spend too much time on it, like I said. It's kind of just giving the concept of this and how easy, this could be. I mean, it could certainly get more complicated, but it really doesn't have to be. This is just going in and reiterating with some subtle tone what already exists in the image itself. Now you can get into kind of more complex lighting, let's say the light is coming from over here and it's shining that way, so you want certain objects to reflect that lighting, direction or something like that. But if you're just kind of starting off with scenic stamping or, some kind of stamping that where you want to get into kind of lighting and form, then I would just suggest just starting off and just following the imagery. Okay, so all I've done in the mountain now is I've just gone in and I've just added that little bit of kind of gray tone into those shadows in there. Okay, so I've just gone in and darkened what was already a little dark. Okay, so we have this image, right? Let me see. I have I don't have another one like a before and after. And we even have these areas down here. If you want to, you can add a little bit of shading, okay? Maybe a little bit more of a subtle fashion to this reflection down here, okay? Alright. So that looks a little bit more dimensional to me overall, but within each given object. And together, having those different forms kind of addressed with some additional tone, it kind of brings a cohesion and overall more dimensional space, okay? And, I would finish off this scene with whatever colors I'm going to be using, blues, whatever. It could still be a sunset scene because grays are neutral here, so. But that just in general is a pretty good foundation, and I could just finish it off in black and white if I want to, or grayscale, a la black and white photography or something like that. Okay, so let's take a look at something else. Okay, now I'm not going to finish this one off, and it's going to look a little bit weird. Okay, but let's just do something with some pens. Okay, this is just going to be kind of a like a study. Oh, here's another lake scene that I did previously for something. Okay, you can see the difference between this lakeside cove and this one in here. This one's nighttime, so I have a lot of it darkened out, but we have that little area illuminated. Now look at this rock right here. There's a little bit of tone on it. Okay, it's the same rock that's right there. All right. See that? Let's see how that kind of grayscale on that, and leaving the top of it light like that. Now it's reflecting that moonlight, okay? Because the whole thing isn't really super light, okay? Alright. So let's just do a little study right here. Let's say, let's do something on these rocks. Let's say that there are going to be some grayscale rocks right back in here, okay? Here's some warm tones and some grays right here. These are just alcohol pens, okay? But like I said, you can do the same concept with any type of media that you're working on, okay? So, I think this is I said this one's a blender. I haven't even used that blender before. Okay, here's some gray, alright? I'm just going in. It's a fairly light gray. This one's a cool gray number 3, okay? But here I am, toning in my... Remember, it's just really subtle at first. I like starting with something very light, Okay. I said it's very subtle right now. I don't know if you can see what's going on camera, but this is this darkness, okay? Here, let me zoom in a little bit, okay? Darker sides of the rocks, leaving the light top as is, okay? And again, this isn't special marker paper or anything like that. I'm just doing this on glossy cardstock. Okay, those are those rocks right there with the cool gray. It's a very subtle tone so far. Okay, now let's warm those. Not that. That's way too light. That'd be really ugly. Alright, this is just a apricot, okay? Let's say that these rocks are a little bit tonal, okay? So I'll lay some of this down, and some of those shadows that I just laid down with the gray. See, I'm still kind of leaving some of those lighter areas as is. Okay. And, you know, there's starting to be a little bit of form being defined. Let me see here, what other colors do I have? Here's a cool... Is this the same gray that I just used? Cool gray. That was a cool gray number 3. Let me see if I can get a darker gray so you can see it on camera better. Let's use a couple different tones here. Here's a periwinkle. It's kind of a, you know, a little bit of a reddish blue, fairly light in tone. Let's mix a little bit of a cool and warm, okay? See, what I'm still doing is I'm kind of addressing the darker areas, okay? This is a very light shade of periwinkle, light value of it. So you can see it like as a kind of like a coloring book, except you're not just coloring within the lines, you're coloring within the lines kind of more strategically, you might say. You're leaving some areas darker and some areas light. Alright, no, this one's a little bit darker, so let's see how that goes. This one might show up a little bit more. Okay. See how my transitions, between one color and the next, they're not too extreme. I like to just move kind of incrementally, whether I'm applying ink with a some sort of applicator, sponge applicator, or if it was something like a colored pencil, I don't make too big of a change, from one tone to the next, okay? I just kind of let things develop kind of incrementally. Okay, so you can see these rocks are looking a little bit more dimensional. This way, let's put a little bit of tone behind there. Okay, so those rocks, let me see, do I still have one? Here it is in alcohol markers, okay? Here it is over here, just with its inks, with the inks, okay? You can do it too. You can do dye-based inks and go. Sometimes it's hard to get into real specific areas, when we're talking about small objects like this. So a lot of times I use both, like the areas that are tough to get to, I'll add some alcohol marker touches. The very convenience of having a kind of a real extra fine tip or fine tip. that. Okay. It's giving the scene a little bit of hue because the periwinkle, the cool color that represents. Okay. See what I mean? You know, when you can apply this, you know, to different media, you can apply it to mixed media as well. All right. The big thing is I'm not going in with a, you know, a violet-like, you know, a periwinkle. I'm not going in, you know, with a color like that. That makes it a little bit more precarious of an exercise. Okay. All right. This one is the, I don't know. Here's the periwinkle now. See, the forms are looking a little bit more dimensional that way, right? Okay. And that was the gray on here. Let's see. Let's see what other colors we can go with. Did I use the apricot? I think that was the apricot before. Let's add a little tweak to this one right here. Let's go with, let's say that there's, I don't know, I usually don't see moss sitting on rocks next to a lake or something like that, but just for a change of hue, let's go with a little bit of a green. See, I'm adding a little bit of green on here, but I have to do it in that lighter area, okay? Because otherwise it's not going to read as green, because this is a very light green. And if I add this light green over a darker gray, I'm not going to be able to see it, but I'm still retaining most of the lighter areas of these rocks. Okay. So a little change of hue in there. All right. I said it was going to look weird. I know it doesn't look too weird to me. It just, I said that because I wasn't going to address all of this water in here, that whole area. You know, I'm just going to talk about creating those volumes. But let's say, okay, let's say there is going to be some blue in this water. Let's add some of this down. Okay. Let's add some of it in this shaded area. Maybe this boat right here is casting a shadow. Okay. It's just like adding tints to something, right? This is a very light blue. Again, it's like this. It's like a 5 or 10% blue. Okay. You can do the same thing in the sky. You can add some of this blue to your rocks if you want to. Okay. Make those rocks a little bit reflective of what's going on in the water. It's not making my rocks look blue because I have all that color underneath. And like I said, these, you know, alcohol pens, they are transparent, so the colors underneath are showing through, but as you can see, I'm just starting to build it up like that. That's a fairly light blue. Let me see this one right here. Here's a salvia blue. It's a little bit of a darker one than that, and I can put that in the shadows, you know, so we can look in the shadows here. But again, I don't want to get into this too much because this isn't a shading video, but you can kind of see what the benefit of creating volumes does. Okay. Okay, that was salvia. I'm going back in and blending that salvia out. Okay, with some of that aquamarine, that really light blue that I used at first. Okay. So, anyways, you can kind of see this coming around like that. And let me see. Let me go in with a little bit of. Let me see if I have another darker gray. I need some more kind of medium tone grayscale alcohol pens. I'm thinking about buying those gigantic sets of alcohol markers and testing them out. I see online where the pens are like really inexpensive, but just to kind of play around with some tones. They're not going to be as nice as the name brand ones, but I'm just kind of curious to see how those ones work. Alright, so going back down here with a little bit of that darker gray and adding a little bit more. Okay. Alright, so we get kind of some rounded looking rocks, okay? And again, this isn't not about lighting. I've just kind of addressed the whole thing just for form, okay? If I was finishing this scene off, I would probably put most of my lighting over here, and just so this wouldn't, you know, draw so much attention, I would probably add some tone over this and make this whole area darker, but I just wanted to address these rocks in terms of three-dimensional form, okay? See the side of this rock has a little bit of shade on it, but the top of it is lighter. You can see little tints of green and warmth on it. See this area down here? We still have the light at the top and darker at the base, okay? And that's the same thing that's happening all throughout here. You know, the rocks in the foreground are addressed a little bit more because there's more definition within that foreground, okay? But anyways, just going in and creating that depth within the objects themselves can add a nice richness to your scene in terms of making the individual objects and areas a little bit more interesting by just the simple use of variation, okay? And then we get, you know, we can apply lighting to certain areas right here. This is lighter in here and darker on the perimeter, so I've just kind of darkened in even kind of the lighter areas within these given objects, okay? You can see it right here. There's volumes within this, but for the most part it's mostly shading. You can't really say, oh, that rock is a lot lighter than that one, or the base of that one, because this whole scene gets fairly dark. But, you know, aside from doing a nighttime scene like this, you know, where the daytime scenes, you know, could potentially benefit from more specific areas of shading, that's where something like this concept would apply. Alright, so it could be done in a very subtle fashion, like this one right here. I wouldn't add too much to this one, you know, because the background is fairly light, but a little bit of this shading like this down here, I think would enhance this compositional foundation like that, okay? Anyways, oh, okay, let me do one more thing right here. A lot of times we're using objects in scenic stamping like structures or whatnot, okay? Let's see, where's my applicator that I was using? Okay. Let's just go for a little bit of gray. Okay, now on this cabin right here, you can see the rooftop is a little bit lighter. I typically leave rooftops a little bit lighter. Down here, I've left the side of this house a little bit lighter too, but you can see this side of it. Tonally, there's just a lot more little tiny black dots stippled onto this area just to make, you know, give the form a little bit of dimension inherent in the impression itself. But you know, we can go in and just make it a little bit more dimensional, okay, with the use of some additional shade, okay? If you wanted to make that cabin brown and make that area of the cabin a little bit, you know, darker brown, bringing in some beige onto it, okay? And now I'm just doing this in gray, but just to make that form look a little bit more three-dimensional like that. Okay, see, this is just gray. Here's a little bit of lighting being applied because I'm using some of this gray underneath that eave right there, creating a shadow created by that overhanging eave, rooftop. Okay. So we can create, let's see, this is one side of the house. I can make that darker. On this side of the house, I can make it a little bit lighter, but still darker than that rooftop. But see, that has a little bit more dimensional form to it, just the same as a round rock would, okay? So let's do something right here. Okay, just for, to make it a little bit faster, let's take these, let's grab 3 shades. Let me see if I have it here. Oh, here's some kind of brownish tones, warm tones right here. Okay, there's some are lighter than others. Okay, let's address this cabin. Let me start off with the lightest one, okay? Let's say I don't want that cabin to just be white, okay, so I want this lighter tone over the whole thing, okay? Okay, there's the whole thing colored in, alright? Now let's go to a slightly darker tone. Alright, that might be a little bit too dark. Let me see. That's even darker yet. Oh, let me see. Let me see if I have a lighter one here. This one's biscuit. Okay, that one's really light too. Let's try to create these two sides a little bit darker. Actually, that biscuit might be lighter than the lightest one that I used so far. Alright, let's just go to camel. Okay, so this camel one I'll do on this side and this side a little bit. Maybe I'll leave some of this side of the house a little bit more illuminated. But see, that cabin's looking a little bit more dimensional, right? Because we've addressed the different planes, you know, of the object, just like this pad is. Here's this blue pad, right? And this area. Okay, this area right here is a little bit lighter. We have this top area that's being illuminated by the light source, okay, so this is a little bit lighter. This is darker, and this is darker. See, you've addressed these three sides, or I don't know, multi-sides, differently in terms of different values applied, okay? Alright, now this one I'll add a little bit of shading here, but let's go to this darker side right here and add some of that down like so. It's a little bit too dark. But see that little, what do you call it, eave or overhang right there is still kind of being top lit, so I've left that alone. Alright, let's go to this one right here, brownish gray. Let's do a little bit of that. Okay, all of this brownish gray, like so. Okay, so we have a more dimensional looking house like that. And I mean, this isn't, I'm not talking about textures or something like that in this video, but let's just add this, you know, this is crying out to me for a little bit of variation, so I can put in some, you know, a little bit of shading into some of these slats or whatever you call it. Here's some of the wood beam in here. Go along with some of that wood direction. But for the most part, we have addressed this cabin with three different values: lighter value on top, darker value on the darker side of the cabin. This is the front of the cabin, or facing us, and I've addressed it. Now, I've put a little bit of shade in there, okay? But for the most part, there's three different values right here. For the most part, depending on what direction the lighting is coming from. So I think that makes kind of for a more dimensional form, just as, you know, a rounded object like that would be. All right? Anyway, rounded forms, kind of enhancing volumes. I was going to say defining volumes, but the volumes are kind of defined within the designs themselves. Here's this cloud right here. Talk about, you can think about this in terms of many volumes, but you can see there's more dots in certain areas, right? And certainly lighter areas like so. And you would address something like this. It doesn't matter, you know, matter about the whatever the surface that's being represented. This is supposed to be just being, you know, some light vapor, right? And this would be like, you know, a hard surface like that, but you can still address it the same way. You can kind of hit your areas with a little bit more tone, okay? Lighter or darker. Here's that cloud down here, okay? Here it is in this one right here. Let's see this where I've added some gray tone in here. I mean, this is about lighting in here too, not about volumes, but even so, there's, you know, some lighter grays right in here to define the volumes that is supposed to be this cloud right there. Okay. All right, so think about that when you're getting into scenic stamping and you're looking into lighting and forms like that, and looking to kind of just enhance any type of forms that you already have, any type of imagery. You can do this on various imagery. It doesn't have to be scenic stamping types of things. It could be a birthday cake, you know, that's round, you know, you want to make it look round like this. This is the side of a round cake. It's a little bit darker than the top of it. You can add in some highlights or whatever like that, right? So apply this to whatever media you're working in, whatever types of imagery that you're working in. Even if it's an outline imagery, you can kind of create volume depending on how you address your coloring of it and the different shades that you apply. All right, so anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I hope that wasn't too confusing as far as what I talked about. Okay.